Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the SCPGA Catalyst webinar series. Today's Catalyst is proudly brought to you by our presenting partner, DRS, Digital Revenue Systems, helping facilities elevate their member experience through premium digital signage designed for golf, fitness, and wellness environments. My name is Blake Jurgis, and I serve as the SCPGA Education Committee Chair and current board member of this section. And our Catalyst series brought to you by our education committee with the simple goal to provide PGA professionals with meaningful education and tangible ideas that you can take back to your facilities, your students, your staff, and your career. Today, we're excited to welcome Andy Matthews from NeuroPeak Pro, a former tour professional who now works as a performance specialist with some of the game's top players. Andy specializes in helping golfers perform under pressure through simple, science-backed breathing strategies. His work has been utilized by players across the PGA Tour, Live Golf, and LPGA, including Jordan Spieth, Bryson, DeChambeau, Madeline Sackstrom, and Keegan Bradley. By combining real-time physiological data with practical on-course application, Andy helps players regulate their nervous system, sharpen their focus, and recover from mistakes, and ultimately allow their skills to show up when it matters most. Today, Andy will give us a practical breathing strategies and coaching tools that we can immediately incorporate into our own coaching, whether we are work with competitive golfers, recreational, or developing juniors. Today's catalyst, we're excited, and Andy is a friend of mine who I've used NeuroPeak Pro, and I'm so excited to hear his knowledge and his presentation today. If anybody has any questions on today's catalyst, please make sure to enter into the Q&A box. We'll make sure that we are just anytime ask, please. We will make sure that we stop Andy for a second, ask a question if you have one, and please make this as interactive as possible. And Andy, it's been fun stuff. So let's do this.
Awesome, Blake. Thank you. Appreciate you having me. Appreciate DRS for presenting the Catalyst series. Really excited to share really how top golfers perform under pressure. And often when I'm in a room setting, I ask for that quick show of hands and really want to get an idea of if you have a player, I'm assuming you're a coach who, looks great on the range, but when they get a scorecard in their hand, they look like a completely different golfer. And, often, I kind of say, hey, let's keep your hand up if you've had that same player look you in the eye after a round or shoot you a text and just say, I don't get it. I striped it on the range this morning. Right. And that player, it's often that one who works on all the right things. They check every box, on the range with their short game, their fitness, their equipment, obviously with their coaching and who they're working with too. But when it comes time to put on a scorecard, it just, it doesn't show up. Um, that player was me, until I learned how to breathe better. And if your players aren't breathing properly, and we're going to look at what that actually means, they're likely missing that link that helps them get out of their own way and play, the golf that we know they're capable of playing. Um, I chased my dream, as Blake kind of alluded to, for 10 years, and most of my career was on what was then the Canadian Tour. And each of my first 5 seasons, I kind of found myself in the same position. I was pouring over the order of merit towards the end of the season, trying to calculate what I needed to do to essentially keep my card. And I would either miss the cut, and if I made a cut, it was just barely. And the frustrating part is I was working hard. I was doing all of the right things, and yet the scores that I was posting didn't reflect the player that I knew I was. And I had read the books, I had worked with the mental performance coaches. I knew all the right words, if you will, of staying present, committing to our routine, trusting it, having fun, but nothing was really changing those scores. Um, And I know that that story might resonate with some of you and sound kind of familiar because we all have that player or have seen that player who just absolutely stripes it on the range, or pours them in on the putting green, but steps up to the first tee and they've got the two-way miss. It's that player who's capable of competing at the next level. We know they have that talent, but like they get in their own way seemingly every time they have an opportunity to prove it. And that's frustrating, for us as coaches, certainly for the player. And it's what led me to this work that, I get to share with you all today. And the moment really everything changed for me was when my coach introduced me to a company, happened to be NeuroPeak Pro, that specialized in something I had never heard before, and that was performance breathing training. I was skeptical, maybe some of you are as well, but we ran a series of assessments using some respiration and heart rate variability technology, and the results came out, pretty clear. I was breathing wrong, which I didn't even know was really possible. And no matter how hard I tried to stay in the present, commit to my routine, trust my swing, or just relax, my physiology, what I found, had already had me beaten before I really even put a tee in the ground. And so asking kind of why does this happen? Why do we as players, if we put our playing hat on for a second, why do we so often struggle to do what we know we can do when it really matters to us? And the answer is surprisingly simple. It's in our DNA. When the brain senses danger, our bodies do exactly what they're wired to do. And it shows up as our natural fight or flight response. It's that rapid heart rate that we feel. It's like cold, sweaty hands, the muscle tension, fast, shallow breathing. We know our players and our clients well enough. You can see them across the fairway. You can pretty much read their body language and know, are they having a good day, or are they kind of stressed and overwhelmed by the round? Now, this next part is the science, and we're going to dip into it just for a second, but it's also where I think this understanding of performance or peak performance starts to make sense. And so if we look at it briefly, the part of our body, the autonomic nervous system, is what's controlling all of those involuntary functions of our body. And it functions just like the adaptive cruise control on a car. It's continuously sensing our environment and automatically making those adjustments to speed and spacing to ultimately keep us safe. An example I often use of that autonomic nervous system in action is when we walk outside on a hot day. And we don't have to tell the pores in that moment to open up so we can sweat and cool down. That just happens automatically. It's our body sensing, hey, I need to make an adjustment here. And conversely, when we walk back into the AC, the pores close, and it all happens here without a conscious thought. But the problem, while that fight or flight response is great for navigating a true life or death situation, it's disastrous for those fine motor skills, for the focus, those very things that we need to play great golf. And worse yet, unless we're actively addressing it, that survival response stays switched on long after that initial stressor has passed. And it creates that perfect environment, if you will, for stress to build up and ultimately take us down. And we see that so often with players when they make a bogey, and it's often followed by another bogey and then another one. And it takes a few holes for them to kind of right the ship. And it's because the autonomic nervous system is always prioritizing our survival over peak performance. And it's why we, as coaches, have watched players struggle in those moments that we know could have been on their highlight reel. And ultimately, what we're trying to do as coaches is help our players, and me specifically looking at this physiological side of performance, is find this state of balance. It's not a it's not a lack of energy and it's not full fight or flight, but it's the right or the appropriate physiological response, if you will, for the actual moment that they're in. And in golf and peak performance work, kind of more broadly, that balance state is often the first step of what players refer to as being in the zone. And fortunately, I'm assuming here that we've all seen that before or experienced that before in our own games where the player ourselves we're in control. Shots are on target and we're suddenly putting the lights out and the game feels effortless. It's an incredible feeling, but it also tends to feel really elusive because when the environment starts, signaling some pressure or expectations or outcomes, the body naturally shifts towards survival. And unless a player knows how to regulate that response, that shift is exactly what pulls them out of that balanced state. Kind of pause there for a second. Blake, is there anything you want to interject?
Yeah, I think my biggest thing is I think you alluded to that that bogey train or when it comes into I make a bogey or I make a double bogey. And this is, by the way, not just as coaches, but even as players too, like when we're playing in our section events. And
Yeah,
a lot of the, I think people on the call maybe be playing our section championship uh, in about 3 weeks now or 4 weeks. And kind of being prepared for that, right? It's sometimes the bigger moment, bigger tournament for us as PGA professionals, and even for our players, sometimes whether it's a junior player or adult player, it's like we make that bogey or double bogey and that response mechanism is going to be important, right? How we deal with it on that next tee box and how we can really balance ourselves with uh kind of do we learn how the skill necessary to bounce back, or do we start kind of maybe breathing too much or too fast and we start freaking out and be like, I've got to make a birdie now, and we get more results focused. I'm curious on that, Andy, is like how does one kind of prepare for that environment? Because I think that one's like we see this. We're talking about the fight or flight right here, and we're looking for that balance. And obviously, we can't necessarily find the zone right away. Maybe not,
sure.
but maybe it's more of a lead into the zone, or at least give us a better opportunity to get to that feeling or that place, right? So what kind of like based on that, and I think that example of that maybe that bogey train or getting rid of that double bogey and kind of bouncing back, how can a player like that learn um, to kind of that skill, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Well, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. It's preparing for it, right? If we're talking in terms of the section championship in a few weeks, you know, chances are you're investing time into working on, your full swing, your short game, your putting, and we can go into that event, you know, feeling confident, but we know the way that this game is, like we're going to face adversity. We're going to face challenge. And even if, that adversity or that challenge shows up of you're having a day and you're going low and you're trying to figure out how not to get in your own way and get that into the clubhouse. That's as much of a challenge as it is when we encounter those bogey trains of how do we keep that going. And you said it too. It's something that you can train. Like this is a trainable thing. Being able to regulate your nervous system. Yes, it starts with a level of awareness. And I think that's what the players who are on those bogey trains don't necessarily have is, yes, they know they're making bogeys, but they don't have that awareness of where their body is physiologically. And I'll often say too in those moments, we can't outthink our brain. And if our body is in that stressed fight or flight survival state, it's always going to prioritize our survival over anything peak performance. And so that's why we see players that are in those moments walking faster, talking faster, swinging faster, tempo changes, the whole bit, because they don't have a mechanism that can start to flip the switch on that nervous system response that's going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And I think um, I know we're probably going to get into this as well, like the training aspect of things, right? And how we can really utilize that. It's like funny. I look at this picture right here, and I see those two cars that are in the yellow that are like our blind spots. It's like the things that we don't know necessarily, we may not see, right? And so, I mean, yes, as a coach, we're trying to guide our players into finding those blind spots exactly. Um, I don't think as coaches or instructors we necessarily talk about the breathing aspect as a blind spot, right? I think it comes in as kind of like a, hey, if you just breathe, you're good to go kind of thing. That's like, hey, just breathe before you're in your pre-shot routine. That's all well and dandy. I'm sure you've heard that all across the world,
Sure.
Andy, right? With all different types of players and coaches. Um, but I think obviously we can dive deeper into that a little bit more and really showcase on like really what the results actually are saying about breathing. Like it's easy to be like, I'm breathing, but like I'm freaking out at the same time, right? And
Right.
I think as players or coaches, and because I don't think we see our players enough on the golf course, right? As coaches, we don't see them in that stress situation that they may experience, whether it's breaking 100 for the first time or in their club championship or in a member
Yep.
guest or whatever it may be. Um, and I think this is obviously, and I know people on this call are a combination of, I know there's some teachers here, I see some general managers, I see some head golf professionals, right? I see a lot of different types of players and or types of professionals on this call right now, which is great because I think as a head pro, it's like we can actually help our members out with, they always ask us questions. We're the experts in the industry. They always ask us questions on how do I deal with these situations. And um, I think we recognize blind spots a little bit better, not just based on technique. And I think that we can do some more controllables. Like we can't control our golf swing, we can't control our golf ball, but we can control where our thoughts are going or
Right.
even our breathing and kind of at least to this point, right? So I love
Yeah,
I love this.
you're exactly right. And you mentioned, the GMs, right, who are managing the club and have staff that are looking to them, you know, the GM's going to encounter more adversity and more challenge in the clubhouse than they are ever going to likely find out on the golf course, just given their roles and responsibility. But just like, we encounter a challenging situation on the golf course, the GM's going to have those difficult conversations with staff members or in board meetings or whatever. And we're all human beings when it comes down to it. And this isn't just a golf performance thing. This is just a human physiology thing. And so if we as individuals in the golf industry are just, individuals at home with our kids, with our spouses, doing what we're doing, if we have this ability to self-regulate, we're going to be that much better at what we do or what our role is in that moment than we would be if we let ourselves sit in that fight or flight state unattended. Um, and I think that's
Love it.
actually kind of a good, kind of a little bit of a segue is like this is what an individual's breathing and cardiovascular activity looks like when they're stressed.
Is that the
And
blue line or the red line?
so the blue line represents the breath pattern. So inhale, exhale as that's going up and down. And the red line is the heart rate and more specifically some heart rate variability. And so in stress, we often feel the high heart rate. We can feel our heart beat out of our chest, if you will. But it's more about the relationship between the heart and the breath. And what I want everyone to see here is how the heart, the red line, is kind of struggling to align with what is the rapid pace of the person's breathing. And so this disconnect right here, or this misalignment, is precisely why We as golfers, as coaches, as players, need to learn how to breathe better because when we look at all of those stress responses, the way that it shows up for us, the only one that we can consciously control is our breathing. And you can't, think your hands dry when you're stressed. I mean, you can go to the towel, but that's just addressing the symptom. And the cool thing about this work is that breathing happens to also be the one controllable that can influence that autonomic nervous system in return, which essentially puts you back in control, you know, regardless of what's on the line. And this works because, and I use this analogy often, breathing is the metronome, if you will, that sets the pace for your autonomic nervous system and every physiological system connected to it. So if we look back at this, if we're stressed and we're breathing quickly, that metronome, that rapid tick tock, tick tock, tick tock pace is sending a signal back to the nervous system that you need to be up for something, even in times when, there's absolutely nothing to be up for. And it's why we all have been told, and we started to get to it there, when someone can clearly see that we're stressed, how often have we been told, hey, relax, step back for a second and take a deep breath, right? And what do we do? It's this big vertical chest filled breath, and it's wrong. The intention is right. We have that association, if you will, that a breath is supposed to help relieve stress and tension, and it does. But if we're doing it mechanically wrong, in a sense, we're like whiffing on that first domino that needs to fall to start pulling our body out of that fight or flight state and into one where we can, relax, settle in and perform. And when we do start to do that, the more rhythmic tick tock, you now see a much better pace in that blue line, right? That sends an equally powerful signal to the nervous system that regardless of how your body and all of its senses are perceiving the environment that you're in, you can be in that spot to relax, settle in, and perform. And so what happens here is this more consistent, more rhythmic pattern that you're seeing in that blue line, it allows the heart to entrain itself, if you will, to what the breath is doing. So the breath always leads the heart rate. And so when a player can actually do this, it's a trained skill, and we're gonna get there here in a second. Not only are they able to calm down, but they start to build in that margin to respond more appropriately and recover quicker, talking about the bogey train from whatever challenge they face next. That person that's on that bogey train, their breathing does not look like this. Whether
Okay.
that's a, yeah.
Hey, one question. Sorry. So can you give me like brief synopsis of like why? I mean, we know kind of why breathing is important. Obviously, like we feel like we're relaxed. Can you just give like everyone just like a brief idea of like the neuro part of breathing, like what it actually does for the neurology of yourself?
Yeah, and again, I go back so often, keeping it fairly simple to that metronome. If we're physically breathing well, it starts to calm the cardiovascular system, so our heart rate starts to slow down. That nervous system then starts to balance. So it's this chain reaction that starts to happen. And then when that nervous system starts to balance, all of those physiological systems connected to our body, including the brain, start to all get into that much more slower, balanced, focused, calm state. You're never going to have a physiological system kind of diverging from another Like the body's ever moving into or deeper into a stress state, or it's moving towards a more calm and relaxed one. So
Yeah,
that's
thanks for that.
that's what's, that's what's kind of happening behind the scenes. And so this is where it simply becomes back to of, hey, I'm I'm a little bit emotional here in this situation. I'm making bad decisions. Like knowing that that's the result, having the opportunity to say, okay, how am I breathing? And if they are breathing fast, if they are breathing high and into the chest, that needs to be the first thing that a player goes to start to, take their foot off the gas, let alone find the brake a little bit.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you.
Yeah. Um, so like honestly, like what does that look like? I want everybody here on the call to start to know what this feels like. And I called out that really tall vertical breath that we often see. And that's the wrong mechanics of doing it. And so what I'd like everyone to do here, if you're able, if you're listening in the car, please keep both hands on the wheel. But if you're able to, just kind of place one hand on your stomach right over your belly button or your navel. And I want you to take a slower breath in through your nose and feel like only your belly expands. So you're essentially pushing your hand out away with the air that you inhale. And so you're trying not to let your chest or your shoulders move. And kind of at the top of that inhale, you just pause for a second, exhale slowly again, and kind of letting that belly contract a little bit. So essentially, the air is then moving up and out of your lungs. And if you repeat that a couple of times, like I said, inhale like you were filling your belly as if it were a balloon. And if you're seated, you can maybe feel like your belly button kind of goes out and down towards your knees. And if you're properly activating the diaphragm, which is that primary breathing muscle that sits kind of right under the base of our ribs, and some of the muscles around the core that support our breathing, there shouldn't be much vertical movement involving the chest or the shoulders. And so when you have that nice controlled inhale, allowing the belly to expand, then kind of exhale, that simply is diaphragmatic breathing. That's the foundation of, better performance under pressure because you're now giving yourself a cue to be able to calm the nervous system. The body has a reason to calm the nervous system because you're giving it a clear message to do it. And that starts to be what sharpens focus and, in often cases of the bogey train, allows you to get out of your own way. So I do a lot of coaching virtually. Um, and, when it becomes really clear that if someone's breathing using their upper chest, you can start to see, and I don't know if you can all see me here, but like you often see this action. If I'm working with someone and I know and I can see that, I know they're not properly activating the muscles. If they're nice and still and static, then we know they are. And so when
I've
we
got a good question. I
yeah,
got a good question here, Andy, actually.
yeah.
Um, so it says, Andy, where is the center of foundation of all body movement for men and women? Is it the same area? Is it different? So when you breathe into your body, does that
That
make
that
sense?
yeah, it is. It's a great question. And so, when we're talking about the mechanics of breathing, um, where that movement needs to start happening or where that awareness should be is below the base of the sternum. So if we're able to inhale, and again, I'll use that filling the air filling a balloon with air analogy. And, yes, our intercostal is kind of on the side. You'll hear some breathwork coaches talk about breathing horizontally, both out and, filling the belly up. We're gonna find success with better breathing technique if we're getting the air down towards the bottom of the lungs first and allowing that to fill up. So if we're talking about, different body types, different genders, um, that gets really, really deep into the science. But if we're looking at it from how can we move the needle quickest for a player who has not spent any time learning how to breathe, it's getting that air down into the belly. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, so far, I mean, looks good. I mean, again, if you have any questions, please keep asking.
Yeah,
This is great stuff.
yep, please do. Um, and like so we put these two pictures side by side here, and just to kind of reiterate it again, every breath that we take sends a really powerful signal to your brain about the environment. That rapid, shallow breathing just tells the brain we're in danger. We need to get it over with. Keeping your body really in that heightened state of alert, whether it's necessary or not. And in contrast, the slow and steady breaths can communicate safety, allowing your body relax and to return to that state of balance. You can see that picture on the left, that person was breathing at 19.6 breaths per minute. That's more than 3 times as fast as when that 6 breaths per minute, where the body kind starts to find that state. Um,
What would be an example of that, like 19.6? Like, where would that, what kind of, is that like, or like,
yeah,
what would that look like, or what situation would that be like?
yeah. I mean that would be, and ironically, these pictures were taken, um, someone just doing a simple mental exercise seated in a chair. This wasn't even them on the golf course, standing over a 3-footer they know they should make. And that's where it just kind of comes back to, Blake, that human physiology in terms of the perceived bear attack, that life or death situation. When we start to measure that, really we couldn't tell if the person was, I mean, being chased by a bear, or if they were standing over a 3-footer to win their major.
Hmm.
you know all the body is going to do what it needs to do to be able to essentially survive that situation. And if we don't do anything about it, that's when we ultimately get in our own way, and we're like, man, I've made that 3-footer 1,000 times, but because that one putt all of a sudden seemed more important than any other that we've had that day, um, things feel and look really different.
I got another
Yeah.
question here. Um, so it says, is box breathing preferred? Um, Basically like 3 seconds in, hold, and 3 seconds out, right? Um, and if that is the case, then how many seconds should one inhale or exhale last?
Yeah, so we hear about box breathing. You always hear it in contra or in concert with, the Navy SEALs and special forces. And when you think about that, if you did um a 3 by box breath, that's a 12-second breath cycle. um, that really starts to slow the respiration rate down, and thereby will slow the body down as well. Where where it becomes where it becomes difficult for those who have never done any breath work before, that box breath pattern, or the 4-7-8 technique, or some of the extended holds, those are really more advanced breathing patterns. And is the science behind them support what they do to the nervous system? 100%. But it's like having, a beginner walk up to your lesson and we're like, all right, lesson one, we're going to start hitting some high draws. And it's like, well, there's some foundational pieces that we need to get in place before we can start tweaking, or before we should start tweaking those respiration rate patterns to be able to elicit different responses. And that's ultimately where I get with, the players that I've coached and who I've been with. This breathing ultimately becomes this volume control of, and allows that person to have that awareness of saying, how am I feeling right now in this moment? And is it how I want to feel to do whatever it is I'm going to do next? Is that walking to the first tee? Is it recovering after a workout? Is it getting ready for bed? And so when the individual has that awareness, we can then install protocols, if you will, that say, hey, if you're getting ready to go to the gym and you want to amp yourself up a little bit, here's what you can do. Or if it's time for bed and you've had a day and you really want to help slow things down, you can use a pattern like a box breath. But again, we need to be able to know that we have that right muscle control, that right technique, that we can sustain, that type of breathing pattern over an extended period of time. Um,
Yeah,
so,
it's great.
yeah, and like a question, I often get is like, yeah, this is cool. Does breathing actually show up on a scorecard? Um, and this is some stats from a player last year. He's one of the top juniors that I coach here in the state of Michigan. Again, checks all the boxes, but like a lot of players, the version of him that showed up in tournaments wasn't the same version we saw in practice, and it was particularly on the greens. He shared that he was kind of overthinking, he was becoming a bit tentative. The same putts that he'd roll with confidence in casual rounds were coming up a bit short. So I spent some time with him on a referral from his swing coach, helping him just retrain the way that he breathes. And more importantly, we incorporated, really structured breathing sessions before tournament rounds. It's my like number one non-negotiable. 10 minutes of breathing within 2 hours of tea time. And he was consistent. He wasn't like fully compliant. He was still 17, but he had a great summer. And so when we looked at the stats and we put his tournament scoring against his breathing sessions, this is what we found. So when he ran a breathing session before the round, scoring average was 72.7. Without a session, it was 73.5. And so that's almost a stroke difference per round. But what happened is some of his best finishes started to line up with some of his strongest pre-round breathing sessions. And we can measure that with the tech that I use in my coaching. And kind of after one session in particular, or one tournament in particular, he said it was kind of weird, Andy. I could feel myself getting nervous, but I knew what was happening and what to do about it. And I think that's really the point here. It's not about just like feeling calmer. It's about giving players a way to recognize what's happening inside their body when they make a birdie or when they make a bogey, to be able to regulate it and then go play golf. It's like, how can we individualize, each shot for what it is? And I'll tell players, like, I don't care how the golf ball got to where it is, whether that was you putting the tee in the ground on the first hole or some other place on the golf course. That next shot's the only one that matters. And we need to be doing the things that start to set ourselves up for it. And like any other skill, it's gotta be trained. Um, like having a 3-footer to win your major is not the time to learn how to make 3-footers. We've got some work to do ahead of time. And so I like to say that changing the way that someone breathes is just like making a swing change or working on your putting stroke. It's going to require, a level of conscious effort here to start unwinding some years of bad breathing habits and ultimately reawakening the breathing muscles that we're supposed to use when we breathe. And as coaches, we all know that The meaningful change requires practice, with the right feedback, whether that's from us as coaches, the tech we have access to, um, video, AI, launch monitors, and some time to do it. And so a movement that feels awkward and really inconsistent today can become a new normal tomorrow. And as it relates to breathing, I think when a player does learn how to breathe properly, they're going to quickly realize they're holding the key to unlock that calmer, more focused state that they like to play golf from, essentially on demand. Um, um, and I think too, for kind of further on that, there's a really well established correlation between one's breathing efficiency and their movement efficiency. So when an athlete of any sport breathes properly and the nervous system becomes balanced, the brain becomes more receptive to new movement patterns and their bodies like simply move better and often with, more controlled speed.
Hey, I got a question, Andy, for you. So when you breathe into your belly and just kind of what is the next step in the process to energize your lower core or belly?
So one of the things that I do, and I often have players do that are having a hard time activating that is I'll have them lie on their back, hold their heels towards their butt so their knees are up, and I'll have them take a phone, take a book. I'll even have some. We'll put like a small weighted plate on their belly and breathe to start to kind of strengthen those breathing muscles that way by just breathing in and pushing that phone, that book, whatever's on their belly up. Um, Especially for the players that I work on tour who, really don't have time constraints in terms of what they're or how they're investing in their game and pre-round. They're doing that breathing session and getting that momentum going before they do their dynamic warm up, before they spend time with their physio. So when I said that 10-minute session within 2 hours of tee time, you know, that can happen just simply by sitting in the car. Get to the golf course 10 or 12 minutes early. Give yourself that time to balance the nervous system, especially if you're dealing with Southern California traffic. Give yourself a chance to reset before you go to the back of the car, get your clubs out and start your pre-warm up. Um, So yeah, over the years, been fortunate to coach from juniors up to some major champions. Started working with Jordan in 2021, Madeline Sagstrom last year, ended a 5-year win drought, Bryson, and Keegan, and kind of rip through those quotes, but the results are lower stress, deeper sleep, increased focus, and kind of better golf under pressure. And kind of sharing this and staying with Keegan for a moment, he incorporated these techniques both into his pre-round and his pre-shot routine. So if you ever see Keegan, put his hand on his belly as part of his pre-shot, you now know, exactly what he's doing. Um, And, in 2022, he ended a 100 start winless streak on tour. Um, he's he's won on tour every year since. Did not get one this season, but the calendar year is still going. But if you've ever wondered, this isn't just for elite players. It's for us individually and pretty much for every player that we coach. If it's the junior just trying to make the high school golf team, the college player that's chasing their dream to play at the next level, or if it's just your club golfer, your weekend warrior who just wants to play a little less stressed and maybe take a few dollars off their buddies in the regular game, there's there's an opportunity to do it. And, he kind of might all be saying like, this sounds great. Um, but when do I have time to add this to my coaching? And, talking with Blake and other coaches, it's exactly why I'm here and what I do. You don't need to become the breathing expert, just like I'm never going to become the experts that you are in your coaching. My role is to support you and your players in this area so that you all can keep focusing on what you do best. And I think the best coaching, successes that I've had is when there's been a collaborative effort among a team to help move a player forward, whether that's from the golf swing, the short game, their physio, sports psychologist, mental performance coach, breathing coach, what have you. And, overall, my goal is to make this process really simple and really effective. And so when a player is referred to me, regardless of their handicap, I guide them through, a pretty clear step-by-step framework designed to create that meaningful, lasting change. And I just ask them, what do you notice about yourself when you're playing your best golf? And they'll usually say things like, I feel calm. The game feels slower. My tempo feels smooth. And then I'll ask the opposite question when you're playing poorly, what do you notice? And the answer obviously changes, and they say, I feel rushed. My swing gets quick. I start forcing things. Um, and that's where it gets interesting because right there, as players, they've identified the gap between how they play their best golf or how they feel when they play their best golf and how they show up under pressure. And back to that awareness piece that, we were starting to touch on, so many players just simply don't recognize when they're getting fast. But as a third party, we can all see it happening when they start walking faster and talking faster and swinging faster. And those are just all signs that nervous system is in overdrive. And so once a player starts to recognize that gap of how they feel when they're playing their best versus when they're not, the next step is obviously to regulate it. And that's where that 10-minute breathing session is such a non-negotiable for me and the players that I coach. And I still compete. um, I've since got my amateur status back, but I practice what I preach and what I coach all my players at. And some players do it at home or in the hotel before they leave for the course. Others do it in the parking lot like Keegan does, sitting in the car. The location does not matter. What matters is that they start their warm up with their physiology already regulated. Like I said, they're not trying to just calm themselves down on the first tee. They're already in control essentially before they even get there. And then the third here is making it easy. And this goes back to what we were talking about, the box breathing, the 4-7-8 technique. You know, when we start with good posture, good muscle control, controlling the respiration rate using a pretty simple symmetrical breathing pattern, um, we want to get them comfortable with controlling their breath. And if we go right to those more complicated kind of multi-phased breathing techniques to help them relax, they're likely doing more harm than good because the individual is just not physically ready to execute those more advanced breathing patterns out of the gate. Like I said, there's just some foundational things we need to have in place, just like there is in the golf swing. So to kind of dive into that and give you all a bit of a takeaway into that, if you're able to grab um, your phones if you're on a device, or um, Blake might be able to drop the link
Yeah,
here.
we should be able to send we will be able to send this out actually to
Perfect.
um so we will definitely make that happen.
Yeah. And for those, it's neuropeakpro.com/golf/hashtag download. And, ultimately, in my experience, a player is never going to reach their full potential until they learn how to manage pressure, and it's scientifically proven to start with how well they breathe. And you know, like I said, I always begin helping new clients establish those three basic principles and basically summarize them for you all in this quick start guide, if you will. So if you scan it, it'll be emailed to you. Um, and my hope that it starts to speak to you and sparks a meaningful conversation with your players. And in it, if any of this resonated with you, there's a link to throw some time on my calendar, 25 minutes. Let's chat more about it, how it can help you in your coaching, how it can help some of the players that you coach. Because, like I said, this isn't about adding another task to your plate. I know you're already really busy, and it's not about creating more complexity in your players' development. It's about introducing them to a practical science-backed framework that helps them get out of their way and play the golf that that they're capable of. And like I said, um, I practice what I preach, and my coach and I learned the hard way. And thankfully for me, breathing changed the trajectory of my golf career. And I go back and look at it, and I did keep my card that year, but it was too close. And in the off season, I just kept working on all the things I knew I should and I had, but I also became really intentional about retraining my breathing and just 5, 10 minutes a day because I could see and feel the impact it was having on me, my stress, my sleep, my energy. And, as a golfer, I started playing better more often. And even when, it mattered most. And so I went from barely keeping my card in Canada where I was playing, finished 10th on the Order of Merit after just adding breathing. And it really is that simple. And the year after I won, Corn Ferry Tour status after that. But what mattered most to me wasn't really the win. It was realizing that, for the first time, I felt like I could actually manage myself when pressure showed up. And that's a powerful realization to have. And I think your players can too, because most players don't struggle when it's just them and the golf course. But as we know, the environment doesn't always stay that way. you know just simply putting a scorecard in front of them changes things. And one moment you're there like all by yourself without a scorecard, without expectations, and the next you're in an environment that feels like this. It may not be the 16th at TPC Scottsdale on a Sunday, but it could feel like it. And so, in all, I chased a dream playing professionally for 10 years, good handful of weeks along the way. I competed along the best in the world. Now instead of competing against them, I get to coach them, and I'm here to support you guys and your players in just the same way because ultimately I think every player we work with deserves a way to perform their best when it matters most.
Yeah, this is Andy. This is awesome stuff, and I got my download already. I got my three keys to breathing for golf already on my email already. Saw that come through, and want to encourage everyone on this call too, just to if you didn't download that exactly perfect. If you haven't downloaded it, please make sure you download it. And then obviously, if you have any questions or um, comments, I know that Andy has you can schedule a call with him and get to know a little bit more about him and the product. Like I said, I've used the product before in the past. And obviously, it helps out our players and just understanding like the getting a different type of instead of just breathe. It's kind of gives you measurable results, and I think we all look for measurable results even outside of the technical world of golf. And
Hmm.
just want to encourage everyone here just to give it a chance and give start trying to coach your players more on the physiological side and more of the performance side. versus always just the technique. And I think we've been doing that nowadays. It's been really cool to see how coaches have transformed their own coaching and adding some of these mental game performance trainings aspects to their toolbox. Um, but I just want to say, Andy, just on behalf of the SPGA and the Education Committee, just want to say thank you so much for today's catalyst and for your knowledge and expertise in this area. And just yeah, just really excited for what the future looks like. And please reach out to Andy. We'll send an email out this later today in regarding to our discussion and all of Andy's information as well. Any final comments there, Andy?
I just want to say thanks, and yeah, definitely encourage you to reach out. I'm an open book and happy to share and support you however I can.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for for your time today, and enjoy your Thursday. And we'll be seeing you soon. Bye now.
See you.